And you should expect this. You shouldn't invite a friend that has a lot of stories and not expect to tell a story. How many want to hear a story about your principal? All right. Where to start? Well, I'll start at camp. All right. So we're both counselors. Our church in Landmark has a teen camp, a church camp, and we're both counselors. As counselors, they entrust us to be the role models for the campers, to uphold the standard of the camp and make sure everybody's going to bed on time. And then there's me and Brother Nathan. We were up late with the kids, and they begged us to tell them a scary story. So we started telling this scary story, and we started off by saying, you know what, the story's scary because it's real. Like, their eyes got that big, they're sitting on the bunks. And then we kept going back and forth. No, we can't tell them. Oh, Colin, don't tell them. Are you sure? Oh, we can't tell you. And they're begging us to tell them a story. And so we told this story about how just down the camp road, everyone saw the house that you drive past, and we told them that house had like this creepy man in it that came into camp at night, and they were terrified. Then I thought that we took it too far there, but then your principal, Brother Pitts, went over there and grabbed this alien. It was an alien mask. He had an alien mask and put on an alien mask, and I went along with it against my better judgment. But Brother Nathan talked me into going along with it. So I had all the kids in there, had them paying attention towards me, and then he comes banging on the side of the cabin doors, and the next thing you see was 6'5" alien face in the window. And they were dying and just screaming. I had the oldest kid in camp trying to crawl in my bunk at night because he was terrified. So that was a story about your principal. I'll leave it at that. But I do remember the last time I was here at Riverland, it was with the college. We were soul winning on the soul winning marathon. And they let a couple preacher boys get up here and preach. And your pastor, Carringer here, told us 5 minutes. If you go past 5 minutes, I will stand up and yank you down. And I was terrified. You know, my friend went before me, Jesse Bayhash, preached about 12 minutes long after he was given 5 minutes. And so the pastor pulled him down, and I thought, that was the most humiliating thing ever. That is not going to happen to me. And sure enough, I was preaching, and I looked at my watch. I had gone 6.5 minutes. And I looked in the corner of my eye, and Luke's dad was standing up to pull me off. And I don't even know where I was at my notes. I said, in Jesus' name, amen. And I left the platform. So those are some memories that I share. I really appreciate your principal, his friendship, and you have a great role model to look up to in Brother Pitts. And thank you so much for letting me preach today. 1 Kings chapter 18. Talk about one of my favorite Old Testament characters in the Bible, Elijah. And for the sake of time, we'll just kind of start at verse number 17, but I'll tell you what happened before that. What happened before that is we have a wicked King Ahab. The wicked King Ahab did not like Elijah because Elijah, as a man of God, stood up against sin. And he stood for what was right. And every time that you stand against sin and stand for right, you should expect opposition. But Elijah specifically stood up against and preached against Ahab's sin. And he rebuked Ahab, and Ahab hated Elijah so much that Ahab was out to kill Elijah. Now let me pause right here. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and you look like a smart crowd today. If someone is trying to kill you, what would you do? Someone raise their hand and tell me, if someone was out to get you and kill you, what would you do? Yes, ma'am, right there yes, right there. What would you do? Hide? That's an excellent idea. What else? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you. Hide is an excellent idea. What'd you say? Okay, but I think you say run away. Not to fear. Well, that's an excellent idea too. Yes, ma'am. What would you do? There you go. She said if you put a bag over your head to poke a hole so you can breathe. That's also an awesome idea. You would probably say run away. The lady right there said hide. Exactly. But what do we find Elijah doing in the story? This is what kind of amazed me about Elijah. Something that really impressed me about Elijah. The man Ahab, King Ahab, who was trying to kill him, who was actually walking around the countryside looking to kill King Ahab was looking to kill Elijah, look what he does in verse number 17. And it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said unto him, Art thou he that troubleth Israel? And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Balaam. Now therefore send and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. You know what he's doing? The guy who's seeking to kill him, he goes and meets the king that's trying to kill him. And listen, if you're standing in front of the person that has the authority and the power that with a snap of his fingers can have your head taken off from his shoulders, you would be kind of cordial to him, right? Not Elijah. Elijah says, you know what, king? I'm not the one who troubles Israel. It's you and your house. And then he starts talking pretty harshly to the king. He says, listen, you go and get all the people of Israel and come meet me on Mount Carmel. Do you know why on earth, if you're thinking like I am when I read this, why on earth would Elijah speak to the king like he spoke to him? Why would he even go to meet the king who's trying to kill him? And the simple message, the simple thought here is because he had faith in the Lord. He had faith in God. And because he had such amount of great faith in his God, it resulted in him doing some pretty remarkable things. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes that we have together, I want to talk to you about the 3 things that Elijah's faith gave him. Elijah's faith that he had in God gave him 3 things that we'll see here in the story. And I want to talk about those 3 things. In verse number 20 it says, So Ahab sent unto all the children of Israel, and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, How long halt ye between 2 opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, I only remain a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. Now the first thing that we see here going into the story, Elijah has come up with this way to prove once and for all who the real God is. You see, the prophets of Baal and even a lot of God's people, the people of Israel, started leaning towards this false god Baal. And they started worshiping this false god Baal. And Elijah believed in the one true God of Israel, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's who he believed in. And so he saw there was a problem with God's people kind of being in the middle of the road, not knowing which way to go, either to follow God or follow Baal. And so he came up with this method or this test to see who the real God is. And Elijah had so much faith. And his faith, first off, we see that Elijah's faith in God gave him boldness. It gave him boldness. Now, there's no other explanation that you can tell me why on earth Elijah would do what we read that he did. Besides he had faith in God, and besides the faith that he had in God, gave him boldness. Now, I'm going to pause right here and say this. Working with young people, and I'm sure your youth pastor could say the same thing, there's something that we need in young teenager women and young men. There's something that we need in even children your age and adults that are Christians, and that's to be bold, to be a bold witness for Jesus Christ, to stand out and to be different in this world. You know, the world is so bold about what they believe, aren't they? Yeah. You see it on the news, you see it on the TV, you see it going down the streets, and you just see it in people's lives. They're bold about what they believe. The world has no restraints about saying what they believe. You think about all the wicked things that are going on around the country today, and we see that socialism is being shoved down young people's throats in public school system. We see that this false idea of murdering babies, abortion, is something that should be legalized, and it's wicked. But you know what? There's a problem today. The reason why I believe that the world is so bold about what they believe, and they're so in people's predominant in the media and everywhere else, is because Christians aren't doing what we're supposed to be doing, and that's being bold and standing up against sin. We need young people like yourselves to be bold, Not bold in your own abilities, not bold in yourself, but being bold in the one that you have faith in, God, Jesus Christ. It gave him boldness to do what we read he did. Elijah was bold in how he spoke to the king. We've already talked about that. How he just went face to face with the king. Looked the man in the eyes who could at any moment have him executed and said, listen, it's you that is sinning, not me, and you meet me on the Mount Carmel. He was bold in how he spoke to the king. He was bold by setting the conditions of the test. Do you understand the conditions here, what his idea was? His idea, Elijah's idea, was to meet on top of Mount Carmel. He wanted all 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the grove to be there. He wanted all the people of Israel on top of that mountain. And here's the conditions that he came up with. He was bold. He was bold because he said, you know what? You make you an altar over here, and I want you to prepare it, get everything that you need to sacrifice the bullock, and you get the wood, and you get everything ready, and I'll come over here, and I'll make me an altar, and I'll prepare the sacrifice. And this is what's going to determine whose God is real or not. The God who rains down fire from the sky and consumes the sacrifice. Those were the conditions, and he was even bold in how he allowed them to go first. I was thinking about this. Think about it with me for a moment. He was pretty bold by letting them go first. Do you understand that if they came up with anything that resembled fire, then everybody on that mountainside would follow Baal? If he came up with a spark, if they could somehow manipulate a spark or a little flicker of a flame, then everybody would have believed Baal was the one true God. He was bold by letting them go first. But you know why I think he was so confident? He was bold because he had faith in his God, that the God that he served, the God that he was willing to risk his life for, is God enough to rain down fire from heaven. He was bold. I'm telling you, I like Elijah for many reasons, but one of them is his boldness. His boldness. The second thing that we see that Elijah's faith gave them was not only boldness, but it was a burden. Elijah's faith gave him a burden. Elijah was burdened. He was burdened for God's people, Israel. He was willing to go through everything that he went through, risking his own neck, talking to the king the way he did, having everybody assembled on that mountaintop because he was burdened for his people. Look at verse 21. We'll see it. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. In verse 21, I see a burdened Elijah. I read that verse and I can see a man of God's heart that's broken for his people. He looks at God's people, a peculiar people chosen by God for a specific purpose. God wanted them to inherit the land of Canaan and enjoy the promised land, and their wickedness and their sin and murmuring against the man of God and their unbelief caused them a lot of heartache and pain. But he's looking at him and thinking, this is not the life that God promised you. Why are you living the way that you are? Elijah was broken and burdened for God's people, his people. He was burdened because they were halted. God wanted them to go forward and conquer the land and possess the land, and now they're halted because they can't determine which God is the true God or not. It wasn't Baal who delivered those people, God's people, out of the Egyptian bondage. It wasn't Baal that made a way for them in the wilderness to escape the pursuing Egyptians. It wasn't Baal who parted the sea and let them cross over on dry ground. It wasn't Baal that provided water in the wilderness from the rock. It wasn't Baal that provided manna and quail meat from heaven. But God's people were so forgetful that they forgot it was the God of heaven that provided for them in the wilderness. And now we see them here halted. They're stopped. They're still. And now they can't make up their minds which God is who. He was burdened for his people to get going and to make up their minds. It's my belief that he wanted them just to make up their minds. He wanted them to choose the real God, but he, in his mind, thought it was better if they would have chosen Baal over God than just stay in the middle. In our minds, we think that, well, if I'm not really sold out for God, but I'm not really in the world, if I'm somewhere here in the middle, then that's somehow okay to God. And that's where God's people were. We see them halted in the middle. But let me remind you that God views being in the middle, neutral, as something that makes him sick to his stomach and wants to spew us out of his mouth. They were halted. He said, listen, if the Lord be God, then follow him. But even if you choose not to follow God, just choose. Make up your mind. Be decisive. He was burdened for his people to make a decision about who they would follow and who they would serve. Then Elijah was burdened in verse number 22. After the people answered him not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, I, even I only, remain a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. He's saying, you know what? After they said, they didn't say anything. After he poured his heart out to them, sharing his burden with them to make up their mind and follow God, crickets. No one answered them. They just stood there and stared at him with a blank look on their face. And then he says in verse 22, I'm all alone. I'm all alone in this. There's 450 of them, plus the 400 false prophets of the grove. It's 850 against one. Man, imagine yourself on that mountainside. And you poured your heart out to God's people to follow you and follow the true God. And no one makes up their mind. You're looking at this 850 men against one. Man, Elijah felt alone. He was burdened because he understood their potential. He understood the potential. It just makes sense. The more people that you have following God and doing right and serving him, the more that can be accomplished for him. That's like soul winning on Saturday. I encourage everybody to come out to that. It just makes sense. The more teams that come out soul winning, the more doors that can be knocked, the more tracts that can be passed out. I believe Elijah was burdened because he understood the potential that God's people had if they just got on. Elijah did a lot of great things by himself. He did miracles. He withstood false prophets of Baal. He brought the widow and oil with the widow and her sons that were going to be taken away. He did so many great things, miracles, and God did so many great things through his life. But Elijah was smart enough to realize the potential, that all the more greater things that can be accomplished if God's people would join him in serving God. He was burdened for his people to make up their minds. He was burdened because of their potential. You know, my youth pastor, I put my youth pastor through so much grief. He was my Bible teacher in high school. He was, at one point, he was like a football coach of the football team. And I'm telling you, me and my friends, we made his life miserable. We pranked him all the time. We were bad to him. We were disrespectful. And after I got saved and came back, he was actually my college dean at the college that I went to. And I went up to him. I said, Brother Pouts, why on earth would you put up with me as long as you did? I mean, you had every right to kick me out of the youth group. You had every right to expel me, kick me off the football team. Why did you put up with me so long? And he told me something I've never forgotten. And I tried to do in the young people that I minister to at Landmark, I try to be the same way to them. He said, you know what? I chose not to look at what you were, but I chose to look at what you could be if you finally gave your heart to God. Right. Do you understand what he was saying? I'm not looking at you now. I'm not looking at your lack of faith and your lack of discipline and your lack of whatever you're lacking. You know what I chose to do? I chose to look past your failures and your faults and your shortcomings, and I chose to look at the potential that you would have if God got a hold of your heart. And Elijah, I believe he's burdened for God's people because he sees the hundreds, maybe hundreds of thousands of God's people. And he said, there's so much potential on this mountaintop. If God did all this through me, one man, think of the potential of what God could do with 100,000 God's people. I'm telling you, Brother Pitts would be happy, ecstatic, out of his mind, just excited, if one young man and one young lady decided today that it doesn't matter what your classmates are doing, it doesn't matter what your teammates are doing, it doesn't matter what your friends in public school are doing, it doesn't matter anything else, but you're going to stand up for God. He'd be overwhelmed excited about that. But think about it if the whole youth group was that way. Think about it if all the youth group was sold out with one mind and one heart, with the things of God in the forefront of their thoughts. Think about how excited that would make him, and think about how excited that would make God. He was burdened for his people. I want you to see something here, and this is my burden for your generation. This was my burden for my generation, but so far it hasn't happened too much. You know also what his burden was? Look with me, if you would, in verse number, 29. It says this. Before that, he lets them go first, right? I'm going to just breeze through it, run out of time here. He lets the false prophets go first. And boy, they start running around the altar, chanting and calling out to Baal. I like Elijah for many reasons. It's probably not a spiritual reason, but I like it because of this. Verse 27. As Elijah is seeing these fools run around this altar, and they're, oh, Baal, fire, doing the fire dance, nothing happens. You know why? Because Baal is not real. Baal's a false god. And they called the name of Baal from morning even until noon. For I don't know how long, hours and hours, almost half the day went by, saying, oh, Baal, hear us. But there was no voice. No one spoke to them, nor any that answered. They got no kind of answer at all. And so you know what they do? Well, guys, we must be wrong. Let's admit that we're wrong. Nope. They leaped upon the altar, which they started jumping up on the altar like fools, crazy people. They started cutting themselves. The Bible says cutting themselves to the point where blood's just gushing out, thinking that if they cut themselves, then Baal will answer them. But look at this. I like Elijah. It's not a spiritual reason, but I like him. Verse 27, and it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is God. Either he is talking, or he is pursuing, or he is in a journey, or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awaked. He's making fun of them. He's seeing them walking around, chanting and dancing and hooping and hollering, and nothing's happening. He's laughing, giving them a hard time. They even cried out loud, cutting themselves. And now it's Elijah's turn. And a part of his burden for his people, not only to make up their minds and understand the potential, but also understand the power in God, see God's power for themselves. In verse 29 it says this, and it came to pass when midday was past, and they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that there was neither voice, nor any to answer, nor any that regarded. In verse number 30, and Elijah said unto all the people, come near unto me. And all the people came near unto him. And he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. You know what he did? Elijah, after they're done, he lets them have all the time they needed. After everybody for themselves, I believe he let them go first so they can understand for themselves how foolish it was to believe in a false God. How foolish it was for them to think that Baal was the true God. He wanted them to see just how powerless Baal really was. And after they saw that, then he came and said, everybody come here. Group huddle. The group huddle on the Mount Carmel there. He brought them over to the altar that their fathers used to worship God on. That maybe even they used to worship